Welcome back to the Rich Life Diaries podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you the secret sweet spots on how to scale a business. So let's get into it. Welcome to Rich Life Diaries, the podcast where we talk real strategies for creating abundance, building a business you love, and designing a life that actually feels good. If you're done playing small and ready to create your dream life, you're in the right place. So, sweet spots. There are so many sweet spots in business, and I've learnt a lot of them over the last 20 years, and being around other successful business owners, I've seen these sweet spots. And today I'm going to debunk what they are and share with you what the sweet spots are in business. And that's talking about revenue and also talking about ad spend. And so what I mean by that is I'm sure you've heard the stories of a business making millions of dollars, $50 million a year in revenue, but no profit. And I'm sure you've heard of the stories of someone spending $3,000 a month on ads and making 20 grand a month in revenue. And then all of a sudden they spend $6,000 on ads, but yet the revenue stays the same or only, goes up by $5,000 or something like that. All these things don't make sense, right? So today I want to talk about what those sweet spots are in business so you don't have to make those mistakes yourself if you are in business or you're about to start a new business. So let's get into it. So I have a friend of mine many years ago. So she started a clothing brand selling athletic wear, and the business is actually still around. But what happened is they started the business many years ago when the revenue was sort of under a couple of $1 million a year. They were making good profit. Eventually that business scaled up to $50 million a year and then stayed at that for quite a while. And long story short, they ended up going into liquidation because the business for many years was making no profit. And I've seen this happen a lot. It's like when a business scales, sometimes if it scales too high, the costs become too much and then the profit just disappears. And there's no point in running any business if you're not making any profit, long term, obviously. So that's kind of what happened with her business. They eventually went into the liquidators, come in, took it over, and the rest is history. And I've seen this happen a lot in all different levels, not just big numbers, even small numbers. Someone making 500,000 and then they scale up to $1 million and then the profit just kind of goes from, there to down there. And, it's really hard, and it's something that a lot of business owners struggle with. And it's not something that's really spoken about either. It's just kind of something you learn as you go along. And you don't find out about all this stuff until you knee deep in, and then you're like, oh, okay, crap. And then you got to learn the hard way. And we've all heard those stories. I heard a story the other day of a girl that started a jewelry brand, was doing really well, had 30 staff, and then all of a sudden the business, was making millions and then just, crashed, and then she shut the business down. So it's a very, very, very common thing. But as I said, it's not really something that gets spoken about. And another sweet spot that I see in businesses as well is the ad spend. So as I said before, doubling your ad spend doesn't always equate to doubling your revenue. If anything, I see quite the opposite happening. Like sometimes if you scale your ads too quick, it kind of makes your cost per acquisition go up a lot, but which means you're not making the revenue to kind of balance that out. So it doesn't always make sense, right? Because it makes more sense to think, okay, well, if I'm spending this much money, I just double it. I'm going to double my revenue. Or if I'm making $1 million a year and I'm, getting, I don't know, whatever, $250,000 profit from that a year. If I just get that up to 10 million, I'll make, $2.5 million or whatever. But it doesn't always equate to that. It's not that simple. If only it was that simple. Because usually what happens in business is, it depends on the business model too. Like it's really hard to pigeonhole this because some businesses run really lean. They don't have big overheads, whereas other businesses have more overheads. And I see this more probably in the e-commerce space, to be honest. And that friend of mine that I was referring to before, the $50 million business, that was an e-commerce store. So, and I think the reason why after she sort of got past that sweet spot of where she was making good profits and good money and then just scaled up too high and then the business just kind of fell over, is because her costs blew up. So things like warehousing, staffing, insurances, stock, all of those things can chew into a business's profit. Now, I'm not saying don't scale a business and don't start an e-commerce business to scale it that big. There's many businesses that do make good money and good profits. But I'm just saying there definitely are sweet spots, and sometimes scaling slower can be better, even though I know in a previous podcast I said, run fast. And yes, that is true, but run fast, but make sure you keep an eye on your numbers as you're running, because I've seen that happen a lot. People scale too quickly and, the costs just kind of come in too quick, and then it just folds them over. They've got no money to basically pay their bills. So sometimes scaling slower can be better if you are at that sort of point where you're wanting to scale up from $1 million to the next level. Going slower can benefit you in that way, because then you're not going to get caught out, I suppose, with, scaling too quickly. Costs go up and your profits just disappear. So the way around that, talking about revenue, is, as I've just said, scale slower. And then that way you can kind of keep a handle on the numbers and, what's going out versus what's coming in. With ads, I would say, scale. Well, they always say in any of those platforms like Meta and Google, don't throw too much money in too quickly if you are scaling an ad. So if you're spending $3,000 a month on ads, don't all of a sudden just whack, double that to $6,000. Because otherwise, if you do that, what will 100% happen, and I've seen this happen in my own business and other people's businesses, is Facebook or whoever, Google, will just take that money and go, oh, thank you very much. I'll take that extra, $3,000. I'll give you the same result, but I'll just take that extra money, and your cost per acquisition, goes through the roof. So with ads, just scale them up slowly. Ideally, 10% increments per day. 10 to 20%, depends on the platform, but you don't want to shock the ads and get them out of the learning. Like if they're in the learning phase or whatever, you don't want to sort of reset the ads. So putting in 10, 15% even on your ad spend per day. So as an example, if you're spending $100 a day, you want to increase that to, $110 a day, to scale that up slowly to get it to that number that you're wanting to sort of spend. And that will also help you keep a handle on your cost per acquisition. It won't shock the algorithm to sort of just bounce up and then reset and then just take the money and then your costs go up. It's just a better way of doing it if you are wanting to scale up your ads. And that's pretty standard, that rule of thumb for all platforms, as I said. So Meta, Google, TikTok, whatever, scale them slowly. Don't go too fast when you are spending money on ads. And just always remember, revenue is vanity, profit is freedom. So don't get caught up in the number. And we always hear these big numbers of businesses making all this money. But at the end of the day, if they're not making profit, they're no better off than you. They've just got bigger bills to pay. So as you're scaling your business up, just always keep an eye on your numbers. Always follow, it depends on if you work with ClickStart, we give you trackers and things like that to follow, like in Excel spreadsheets. But if you're out on your own doing it, just always make sure you keep an eye on your outgoings and obviously what's coming in the door as well, just to make sure you're keeping a handle on your profits and things like that and keeping an eye on it. And keep in mind too, if you are a new business owner, making profit in the first year or so, it's kind of rare, to be honest. Some of my clients make profit in the first year and some of them, make very little profit or none. And that's normal too. So don't freak out if you are new to business and you've just started a business recently and you're in the first year or two and you're not really making much profit. Don't get into that mindset of thinking, oh, this isn't working, I'm just going to throw the towel in, because that's normal in any new business. In all the businesses that I've started, I don't think I've made any profit or very little profit in the first 12 months, and that's completely normal. And what you need to do when you are starting out is try to reinvest any profits you do make back into the business, because you want to grow the business long term, obviously, and it needs money to grow. So you need to be spending money on marketing and getting bums on seats or getting people in the door, so to speak. So don't be put off by that if don't compare yourself to a business that's 5 years in, because when you're a brand new business, it's literally like being a baby. You have to learn how to walk, you have to learn how to talk, you have to learn how to feed yourself. There's a whole heap of things, and it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time to get to that point where you're making profits. I've got a friend of mine, he has a huge e-com business, makes over 100 million a year, and they didn't make any profit in the first 2 years. So, that's a perfect example of, have set realistic expectations if you're brand new to business and you're just starting out, because sometimes it won't happen overnight. It might take a bit of time to get there. So if you are brand new to business and you're just starting out, you might be thinking, okay, well, that's great. Where do I start? How do I know if I put too much or too little? And there's a sweet spot with that too. So with ad spend, if you don't spend enough, nothing is going to happen. And I see this all the time with my clients. They breadcrumb money in because they're too scared to put too much money in case they lose it, but then nothing happens. And an example of that would be if they're spending under $50 a day on their ads on one platform. Mind you, I'm not saying wash it out by putting that $50 a day into 2 different platforms. If you're putting $50 a day into one platform, one ad set, you should be getting a reasonable result. We sort of recommend at ClickStart ideally minimum $50, but ideally if you can spend $2,500 to $3,000 a month on ads, that usually gets most of our clients a really good result. What I've seen is people that spend under that, like under 2,000, they'll still get a result, but the result won't be as good. So it depends on, I guess, how comfortable you are at putting that money. I know a lot of people are scared, and when they get to the time of launching and hitting the go button and turning those ads on, they freak out a little bit because they've got money going out. But it's something I see all the time. So as long as you're spending more than $50 a day on one platform, you should be getting a reasonable result. If you spend under that, you won't get a result. It's so weird. Like I've seen clients, where they'll just spend like $20 a day or $30 a day. They might make $2,000, but then they've, the cost of the products is that or whatever. So they're making zero money basically. And that's really common. So if you don't spend enough, that's another sweet spot. If you're not spending enough money on ads, you're not going to get any results. You're just going to be burning cash basically. So that's another sweet spot that you need to be careful of when you are starting out a new business and starting out ads. And another thing, talking about ads, you need to remember too, ads are pretty crap at the start, that take a while to perform. It takes them a bit of time for the algorithms to understand what your ideal target audience looks like. And they need to get out of that learning phase of understanding what a conversion looks like or whatever it might be, depending on your business model. So you need to give the ads time to sort of scale and get better. And they do improve with time. And I've seen this a lot with a lot of my clients that are spending that $2,000 to $3,000 a month on ads. The first month they might make $6,000 in sales. The next month they might do 10K in sales. The next month they might hit 15K in sales, and then 20 and then 30. But yet their ad spend has stayed the same. So their ad spend hasn't changed. It's still $2,500 a month or $3,000 a month or whatever. So I see that quite a lot. So just make sure you go in with those expectations that you're not going to get instant results. It's going to take time to scale up. Don't freak out, because that's what most people do. They freak out and think, I'm not making profit. Turn off the ads. That's normal. Low profit is normal in the first year of any business. So just go into your business with that mindset and you'll be okay. And just make sure that you're spending enough money on ads to get out of that sort of, to get in that sweet spot. And then once you're sort of spending $3,000 a month on ads, if you do decide to scale that, as I said before, just do it in small increments. So just do 10% a day kind of thing, so you don't throw the algorithm off and reset the ads. So to recap on the sweet spots in business, as I said, with ad spend, make sure you're spending enough and make sure it's over $50 a day on ads, ideally, if not more. Ideally, $100 a day would be better. And make sure if you are wanting to scale, once you're getting revenue in after a few months from that and you're happy with that and you're wanting to scale those ads up, just do it in small increments of 10% a day or 15% a day. Try not to do anything more than that. And then with revenue, once your business starts growing and scaling and you're making more money, just make sure you keep an eye on what's going out and what's coming in, because I see a lot of businesses fall over because they're making huge numbers. Like, as I said, my example, $50 million a year, but yet zero profit. And then they end up going into liquidation or they shut the business down. So just make sure you keep an eye on that sort of those sweet spots within your business. So guys, that's my podcast today discussing the sweet spots in business. Make sure you subscribe to my channel to keep up to date, and I look forward to seeing you back here in a couple of weeks. See ya.